Welcome to our first podcast of The Beat. My name is Nancy Powers. I am originally from Puerto Rico, San Juan, Puerto Rico. I was born and raised there. I know that you may or may have not seen our introduction. This is Renata Del Moral. Renata.
Hi everyone. We're very happy that you're able to join us. Um, my name is Renata. Myself and Nancy are partnering up together so that we can talk and use this platform for to talk about crime victims and use it to create awareness on some of the issues that come up and hopefully also share our experiences and point people to the right direction and how to find some resources.
Absolutely. And today we want to know more about Renata Del Moral, what makes her who she is, and why she chose the field of first responder for all kinds of violent crimes. So, Renata, back to you. Who are you, and what made you, what inspired you, or what drove you to this type of field?
So I know that you're going to be talking about in your introduction, not just about how you started in this field, but also a little bit about yourself. So I will share a little bit myself about myself as well. Um, I'm also you talked about how you were born and raised in Puerto Rico. I was born and raised in Mexico City, and when I immigrated to the U.S., like many stories of many immigrants, um, I didn't have a lot of resources, and I didn't really. I had to overcome a lot of things, right? A lot of social issues in order to become the person that I am today. So one of the poverty is one of those things that I did have to overcome, and I put myself through college, and I wanted to do something different with my life. So um, it wasn't always easy. I think overcoming barriers can be difficult, and that's why sometimes not a lot of people are successful at it because it requires sacrifice, it requires commitment, um, and I think that's one of the reasons or part of what makes me who I am in terms of advocacy, in terms of cheering on my clients, the victims, in overcoming their situations. Because to a certain degree, I've experienced it myself, right? Um, so, so
And
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to make sure that everyone understands we call them victims in this podcast because that is the legal term for the people that we help. Because I know that there's a stigma about that. A lot of people are like, I don't call myself that. I call myself a survivor or an overcomer or things like that. We are not trying to be disrespectful. It's just the legal term. So I wanted to just clear that up. And let you continue. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah.
So yeah, so once I it was time for me to decide, like, okay, where am I gonna go? Like, uh, 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 um, at that age where you're becoming an adult, and I didn't have a lot of choices. First of all, I'm not very smart. I always knew I couldn't like be a doctor or an engineer.
I think she's very smart.
I've always struggled with school since I was little. And then on top of that, you add the fact that English is my second language. And then on top of that, you add the fact that I didn't have any money for college. Um, so all of those things had to factor in my decision making process as to, okay, so what can I afford to do? And what do I like to do? And I decided that I could work with children. I enjoy working with that population, and I didn't have to have a full 4-year degree in order to become a preschool teacher. So I just decided this is doable, right? Like academically, I can accomplish it. Financially, little by little, I can make it happen. So instead of 4 years, I was looking at 2 years, and it was much more affordable in my mind. So I went for it. I got my credits. I started working as a preschool teacher, and I enjoyed it. But I did feel like I needed. I wasn't making as much of an impact as I wanted. Um, in kids' lives. So I decided, well, maybe I could change things around and um, continue on with school and maybe getting a 4 year degree in maybe social work. Because I thought, well, that would be a field where I can still work with children and make a greater impact. So I switched things around and I continue to move forward with adding more classes to be able to earn a bachelor's in social work. And while I was finishing up school, I landed a position as a assistant with Child Protective Services, and and I was working with social workers and helping them with their workload, and I enjoyed it. I thought, this is where I'm going to end up. I'm going to graduate with my social work degree, and this is what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a social worker working with children's services, and so that was that. Um,
Why children?
I don't
What
know.
what was what was
I just felt like if you're going to make an impact in somebody's life, you got to start when they're young. Um, And so I felt like if I could make an impact in their childhood, then that would impact the type of adult they were gonna become.
do you think that because you probably you're in your mind you're like, well, when I was a child I needed to know more things, maybe I should help that population to grow better, or did you ever internalize the reason why you wanted to do children as part of you and your upbringing or anything like that? Just question. I don't know. I was just
I think
wondering.
definitely that was an underlying um, motivation for sure.
Because I think that when we're children, especially when we grow up in poverty, it's harder, to like do the things that you want to do or have the things you want to have, and you wanting to impact children is I think it's a reflection of you had to grow up so fast when you're in that situation. Maybe
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it was an underlying motivation there
Mhm.
to work with that population. And then as I was already in my mind all set, knowing what I wanted to do and where I wanted to stay long term, career wise, the county had some budget cuts and they laid off 500 employees, and I was one of those 500 employees. And in looking for another job, I I ended up working at the district attorney's office, and there I started working with crime victims. This time wasn't just specifically with children populations, but all kinds of different crimes. And what I realized while I was working there is that um, crime affects not just the individual, but their family members as well. So everything that is depending on them, right? Whether it's a friend or family member, a coworker, what the victim goes through impacts every aspect of their life, and as well as um, everybody that comes in contact with them. So, in working with all kinds of different crime victims, I started realizing that what affects a parent affects the child directly. And I just decided to continue on and continue in working with crime victims in general, because it affects not just one individual, but multiple individuals, including children, families.
Especially children's, I would say, especially children's. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just decided, okay, once the whole budget thing situation got resolved and there were openings to go back with children's services, I just decided I'm just making as much as an impact working with general crime victims than with specifically the child population. So I just stayed, and then I actually over the years I went back and got a master's degree, and um, And then I graduated from working uh, state cases at the DA's office to now working federal cases. Once I got a master's degree, I was able to land a position with the federal government, working with crime victims at the federal level. So, yeah, that's pretty much how I ended up um, in this field, wanting to make a difference, and then one thing led to another. And then I became aware of how crime affects not just one individual, but multiple people, including children and families. And I just decided to stay. And I felt like that was for me. That's what I wanted to do long term, and that's what I'm doing now.
Okay. And so you said that you went into the federal, and it was just like a job. What have you done with the federal government so far? Is it any different from working with Child Protective Services and in the children community?
It is very different. You would think, like, when we talk about um, it's it's different and it's similar. But when we talk about, let's say, defendants' rights, like, everybody's familiar with Miranda rights, and they're the same at state and federal. And there's like a vast knowledge of what they are across the board. But when we talk about crime victims, what most people don't know is that victims' rights vary from state to state. So your victims' rights in California look very different than if you were a resident of, let's say, Nevada, or Montana, or another state. So it varies state by state. At the federal level, it stays the same across the board. But there's those little differences that most people are not aware of. And so, for instance, here in California, we have Marcy's rights. Um, and the thing too to talk about, or to note to our viewers, is the fact that a lot of this loss, victims' rights loss, like Marcy's rights here in California, or Amber Alert, that we see nationwide, that most people are aware of, or the Adams Walsh Act. All of those come from a place of where families, or an individual, it comes from crime, it comes from brokenness that family members
Experience, yeah.
experience, and um, they made a difference, and they went and they fought for um, to create awareness,
And
and
to
that,
protect the next person, right? To protect the next person that it may happen to.
correct, prevention. And so it's important to know how the rights and the programs, and the um, things that we see for victims that were created by the actual survivors, a lot of them. And that's really sad if you really think about it.
Because we don't think about prevention. We think about the solution to a problem that already happened. We are very reactive, but not preventative. It's almost like when we go to the doctor, we only go when we really feel pain, but we don't want to go when nothing is going on. We only gonna want to go when something happened. And so that is the same with crimes. Like we don't think about what could happen, what kind of law I need, until something does happen, and then you're like, wow. But the thing is, like you said, the survivors, the families, are the ones left behind to make changes. But again, it does take one person to make the change, and I think that's what is important about us doing this podcast as well, is that it takes us bringing awareness to bring change into our communities. And so that is great. And the next question that I have for you is, how long have you been doing this job, and what keeps you going? What are some of the things that keeps you going into this job?
What motivates me to continue on into this job, I think it's, first of all, you have to recognize, you have to have like a certain personality for it. Like, for instance, for me, I've always known that I didn't want to work in a hospital setting. I just don't like those. or certain populations like mental health, like working with mental health clients. I think you have to have a demeanor for it. And I think that's the reason why I've stayed for as long as I've stayed in working with crime, all kinds of different crime victims. Um, it, um, I think I have the demeanor for it to be able to still continue to have balance between work and the scenarios that you see at work, that are the human component of it. It's sometimes the situations, a lot of times the situations you see is they're very difficult to process, and to witness. So I think I do have the demeanor for it, um, and also the experience. At this point, I've done this job for over 15 years, maybe 20, and and just the experience that comes with that you collect along the years, it helps you to be the best resource for the victims that you see in your workload. So I think the experience is something that I do feel that I can bring to the table to the victims that I see on my workload today. I think I'm a much better advocate today than I was when I first started. So
One of the things, as a victim advocate myself, I still remember my first case where I made uh, I said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, how was it for you when you first got a case, and how did you feel like it went for your first case?
for my first case, it was actually the big case that I remember that it felt to me like my first case in working with a crime victim was a homicide. And it was these young men who was shot and killed. And my job was to pick up the phone and offer services to his mom, in terms of funeral and burial. Um, and that my hand was shaking when I picked up the phone to make that phone call, because it was back in the day when we still had desk phones. People use cell phones now and iPhones, but it was back in the day where you actually had to pick up the phone and dial. So I do remember my hand shaking when it was time for me to pick up the phone and talk to that mom and offer her services. Yeah, that was tough. That was a tough one. Um, but you will continue to learn from each case because they're all different. So as much as we've done it for so many years, every scenario is different. There's no cookie cut approach when it comes to working with victims. And I think it's important as advocates to allow the victim to tell us from their perspective and their expertise, because they know themselves better than we know them, and they know that their situation. They're experts at who they are, and we're not. Um, and somewhere in my early years, I realized that if I allow victims to tell me from their perspective, um, what is it that they see as a priority to them, I think that really helps the relationship. So that when you do make mistakes along the way, they're more
Forgiving.
Yes, they're more forgiving.
More forgiving. Well, I didn't have that chance, right? Because for me, it was a little different. I definitely said something I wasn't supposed to say, and it's not something that you could take back. And so, I think I let my nerves get the best of me, and I was in a weird situation, and maybe at some other point in the podcast,
Okay.
I will go back to that story, but. You did mention that most of the laws and things that we follow come from, something bad that happened, victims that have either passed or themselves made the change into legislation. What can you tell me? How can our viewers or our listeners uh, make an impact in law, as you have seen it? Like, how can they say, hey, this is wrong, This is not good enough for me. How do they make that happen? Do you know?
I think we need to first off like create awareness of what the problem is, how it impacts individuals and families, because families make up this. They're the makeup of our society, um, and um, so I think the first step is creating awareness on how it impacts all of us in one particular community, and then go from there. Um, because it is an unfortunate situation where victims don't only have to recover from the crime, but now they're also having to fix it. Like
And
it's a
advocate
lot.
for them, for the one that's not longer no longer there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So um, and I think that's one piece of advocacy that also, like when you talk about what keeps you going or what keeps you in this field, is if we can assist a victim in recovering from the crime, then chances are that we are contributing to their success as well as the things that they plan to do, and how they're going to impact others. And they can be your um, advertising force, if you will, because they experienced it and they can now have recovered from it and they can talk to others about um, their experience and how they were able to overcome it. So having um, helping victims in recovering, I think that's also a way to um, develop change in 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 this area, in the area of um, advocating and changing things for the better.
Good, good. Anything else you want to tell our audience? Anything that they could expect to hear from you as we go through this podcast?
So I think what they can expect from not just me but you too, both of us, is to we want to hear from you about what type of crimes do you guys want to talk about, what kind of scenarios, what kind of subjects, and then you and I can address those issues or those questions. And then also, I think what you and I want to do with this podcast is to really provide folks with some guidance and some resources. So I know next we're going to talk about your story.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, for episode 3,
Mm-hmm.
we want to talk about um, sexual assault, not just in adults, but also in children.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to leave the audience with some knowledge of what are some of the red flags, risk factors, as well as um,
How to create a safe space for that child, if you're the parent, for them to come to you and be able to open up to what's going on in their life, right? So how us as advocates, because you could be the advocate for that person, right? How can we create that safe space for that person to trust us, to be able to open up and speak to us? um, and that will be very impactful.
right. And then not it, and it's not just for like working professionals like
Mm-hmm.
you and me, but
Yeah.
how can you, as a neighbor, as a friend, as a parent, like you said, um, how can you create that safe environment for that individual to come forward um, and disclose, and how do you handle it? What are some of the tools that you need to know and some direction? So I think that's what we want to do with this podcast is talk about different types of subjects um, in terms of crime and and
And we will also use real life scenarios, right? Because you, in between the two of us, we have almost 30 years of experience, and we could bring forward some scenarios and some things that we have seen and how that has brought up change, and also, bring some resources that we have seen that actually work for individuals. So please like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel if you really want to listen to um, how we bring awareness to sexual violence, to violent crimes, and how to prevent. And because that's the main idea, right? Is create prevention, so we could be better as a community.
Yeah. All right, Nancy. So the next episode will be your story.
Yes,
And then
ma'am.
from there, we'll kick it off with starting off with our first subject that would be sexual assault of all different types of populations and ages. And then stay tuned.
All right, stay tuned.